Some stories don't begin with a bang. They begin with silence. A kind of silence that settles over a room like fog. Thick, unnatural, and waiting to be broken. And when it is, when the first cruel act slices through that silence like a razor, nothing ever goes back to the way it was. What you're about to hear isn't just about a haircut. It's about power. And what happens when someone tries to use it as a weapon, only to hand that weapon right into the hands of the very girl they tried to cut down. At precisely 10:45 a.m., 17-year-old Alina Brooks sat in the front row of her history class at Westbridge Academy, a school so elite it charged $87,500 a year just to breathe the same air as legacy students. Alina didn't come from a legacy. She came from a one-bedroom apartment shared with her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts at St. Mary's and wore the same sneakers for 5 years, so her daughter could show up every day in a freshly ironed uniform and carry the kind of fire that couldn't be bought. What set Alina apart wasn't just her GPA, a perfect 4.0, or the way she could analyze post-colonial dynamics with a sharp tongue and sharper mind. It was the way she held herself, the way she refused to shrink. And for some people, especially those who'd been told their whole lives that power came with birthright, that was intolerable. That morning, as the teacher mumbled through the finer points of the Treaty of Versailles, Alina felt something. A slight tug on the back of her ponytail, then another, then a sound. Metal. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in a classroom unless someone is cutting construction paper. She turned too late. The scissors had already sliced through her hair. Thick strands of chestnut waves, carefully cared for, deeply personal, spilled onto the floor like someone had spilled ink. A few students gasped, a few recorded, and one, Connor Van Doren, smiled. The same Connor who threw footballs like his father threw around political favors. The same Connor whose Instagram bio included CEO in training. The same Connor who had never, not once, been told no and made to live with it. He held the scissors like a trophy. And the class? 22 other students? They just watched. There was no screaming, no breakdown. Just Alina, frozen in her seat, slowly bringing her hand to the back of her head. Her fingers met the uneven, brutal remnants of what had once been a point of quiet pride. A connection to her Ghanaian grandmother who'd said, "Never let them touch your crown." But they had, and they did it in front of everyone. Now here's where things get interesting. Statistically, in elite institutions like Westbridge, only about 2.5% of the student body are there on need-based full scholarships. Of those, an even smaller fraction, less than 1%, graduate in the top 5% of their class. Alina wasn't just surviving Westbridge. She was outpacing the people it was built to elevate, and they hated her for it. She stood, not slowly, not dramatically. She just stood like the earth had shifted under her desk, and standing was the only stable option left. "Mr. Garrett," she said calmly, eyes on the teacher, still pretending not to notice what had happened. "I'd like to report an assault." The room held its breath, but Mr. Garrett, tenured, weary, complicit, just cleared his throat and muttered, "Let's not make this bigger than it is." Alina blinked once, then again. "Not bigger than it is." Her voice was still steady. "A student just cut my hair, with scissors, in class, in front of witnesses, on camera." Connor leaned back, smug. Lila, his sidekick, tried to stifle a laugh. Weston looked guilty. Braden looked like he was enjoying every second. And the teacher? He reached for his whiteboard marker like he could rewrite reality. Maybe once Alina would have sat down. Maybe once she would have let it go. Told herself hair grows back and dignity can be stitched up. But not today. Not after 3 years of being whispered about in hallways. Not after the silent lunches. Not after watching teachers ignore cruelty so long as the cruelty wore a Montclair jacket. "Let me help you out," she said. "Would you like me to collect the hair as physical evidence? Or will the security camera footage suffice?" Someone snorted. Then silence again. Connor's smile faltered for the first time. And here's the thing about power. It's fragile. The moment someone stands up and doesn't play their role, the whole system starts to crack. Alina turned to the class, her half-shorn hair catching the morning light like a jagged halo. I want you to remember this moment, she said. Remember who stood up, remember who laughed, and remember who stayed quiet. She packed her bag slowly, methodically, not like someone running, but like someone preparing for battle. And just before she left the room, she paused and looked at Connor. Your dad's name is Russell Van Doren, right? Owns Van Doren Properties, Westbridge's top donor. I just want to make sure I tag the right company when this hits the news. Connor's smirk vanished entirely. And then Alina walked out. Later, surveillance footage would show her walking down the hallway like a general, shoulders squared, face unreadable. She didn't go to the nurse's office. She didn't go to the principal. She went to the bathroom, locked the stall, took out her phone, and made 3 calls. The first, her mother. The second, her lawyer. And the third, a journalist. One who'd been investigating Westbridge for years, but never had a student willing to speak. Until now. By the time she stepped out of that stall, the war had started. Not just against a boy with scissors, not just against a school, but against a system that thought excellence was permission to wound, so long as the person bleeding couldn't afford the cleanup. They had no idea what they had started, and neither did she, because the next 24 hours would flip the world of Westbridge upside down. Let me leave you with this. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't begin in the streets. They begin in classrooms, in silence, in the space between a snip of scissors and the moment a girl decides she's done being polite about injustice. There are moments in life when the world seems to hold its breath, not because something extraordinary has happened, but because someone has refused to go quietly. The day after the scissors incident, Westbridge Academy wasn't holding its breath out of guilt. It was holding its breath out of fear. Fear that for the first time in decades, the walls were about to crack. And standing in front of them with a metaphorical hammer wasn't a politician or a lawyer or a protester. It was a 17-year-old girl with uneven hair and an even sharper sense of justice. The video had been online for just over 12 hours. That was all it took. 12 hours for the footage to leap from a private story to national exposure. In that time, over 1.4 million views across platforms, 23 re-uploads, 17 press inquiries, and 1 email from an attorney's office in Manhattan. If you are the student in the video, we will represent you pro bono. Immediately, Alina hadn't responded yet. She was too busy preparing for what she knew was coming next. The system's attempt to silence her. It started with a summons. She was called to the principal's office during lunch, escorted by a security guard who'd never spoken to her before. The hallway felt colder than usual, quieter. Students whispered, avoided eye contact. And for the first time in 3 years, not a single person smirked at her in passing. Because now everyone knew. She was no longer the scholarship girl. She was the girl who'd gone viral. Principal Emmeline Radford's office was more of a museum than a workplace. Marble floors, oil portraits, a chandelier that probably cost more than Alina's entire education. But none of it intimidated her. She walked in, sat down without being asked, and folded her hands like she was the one holding the meeting. Dr. Radford gave her a tight smile. This has gotten out of hand. No, Alina replied. It's finally getting into the right hands. We understand you're upset. I'm not upset, Alina interrupted. I'm documenting. The principal blinked. Excuse me? Alina took out her phone, hit record. Please continue. You can't record this conversation, Radford said quickly. According to Connecticut state law, Alina replied, her voice calm, as long as one party consents to the recording, it's legal. And I consent. South, please, continue. The room shifted. The principal's power, once thick and heavy, seemed to deflate under the red light blinking from Alina's phone. We've reviewed the footage, and while inappropriate, it doesn't appear to rise to the level of criminal behavior. He used scissors. That's a weapon. Radford exhaled. Connor Van Doren is deeply remorseful. No, he's not, Alina shot back. He's embarrassed. There's a difference. Here's where the numbers matter. In the last 10 years, Westbridge had expelled 7 students. All 7 were on financial aid. Not a single legacy student had ever faced expulsion, even in cases involving drugs, violence, or harassment. The statistics were public. The pattern was not, until now. The board, Radford said carefully, is considering disciplinary action for all involved. Including me? Alina asked, raising an eyebrow. You did violate the school's media policy by posting video. I didn't post the video. There was a pause, a flicker of fear in the principal's eyes. You assumed I did, Alina continued, because it's easier to believe I'm stirring the pot than admit your system is broken. Radford's face hardened. Do you know who you're dealing with? Yes, Alina said. I'm dealing with people who are terrified of the truth. And with that, she stood and walked out. That night, the next wave hit. A black car parked outside her apartment building. A man in a tailored suit rang the buzzer, claimed to be from the school's legal team. Her mother, exhausted from a 14-hour shift, answered the door with narrowed eyes and clenched fists. I'm here to offer a resolution, he said smoothly. An opportunity. Alina stood behind her mother. Define opportunity. We understand this has been distressing, he began, and Westbridge is prepared to ensure your continued success. College application fees covered, an upgraded laptop, additional tutoring resources, perhaps even an internship. In exchange for what? A written statement, he said, acknowledging that the video reflects a misinterpreted peer incident and that you no longer intend to pursue legal action. Alina stared at him. You want me to lie, on paper, to protect Connor? The man didn't blink. This could help you, Miss Brooks. You want to go to Harvard, yes? Imagine what we could, No. You haven't even read. I said no. He paused. Then slowly he leaned closer. You're making a mistake. You don't understand the reach of the Van Doren family. Alina leaned in too. Number, you don't understand mine. She closed the door, locked it, and sent the recording of the exchange to the journalist she'd spoken to earlier that morning. 30 minutes later, it was trending under the hashtag number sign, Bribe the Scholar. And here's the thing no one at Westbridge had accounted for. Alina wasn't alone anymore. Hundreds of students from other schools started sharing their own stories. Anonymous posts, secret screenshots, a few even reached out directly. By midnight, Alina's inbox had over 300 messages, many of them from strangers. Most were supportive. Some were terrifying. Delete the video or else. Poor girls don't win lawsuits. We know where your mom works. But she didn't flinch. Because when you grow up navigating systems that were never designed for you, housing, healthcare, higher education, you learn early that silence is a privilege and survival is noisy. The next day, when she returned to school, something had changed. People moved out of her way in the hallway. Teachers looked uneasy when she entered the room. Connor? Nowhere to be seen. But she knew it wouldn't last. The powerful don't give up power without a fight. They regroup, they reframe, they retaliate. Still, she wasn't scared, because for the first time, she didn't have to carry the truth alone. Let me end this episode with something personal. In most schools like Westbridge, reputation is everything. But reputation without integrity, it's a glass house on fire. The people inside don't realize the heat until the windows start shattering. What happened to Alina wasn't just about bullying. It was about systemic protection of those who've never had to learn the difference between actions and consequences. But here's the math they didn't count on. One girl, plus one video, plus one truth, minus a reckoning they can't contain. People often say the truth will set you free, but they forget to mention what happens before that. Before justice comes the chaos, before change comes the storm, and before you're free, you have to be willing to lose everything. That's where we find Alina now, in the eye of that storm, bruised, exhausted, but more dangerous than ever, because now she had proof. Now she had allies. And more than anything, she had nothing left to fear. The morning of the emergency board meeting began like a scene out of a political thriller. News vans parked outside Westbridge Academy. Students clustered behind the gates holding handmade signs that read, "Protect students, not donors," and "Excellence isn't a crime." And in the center of it all, Alina Brooks, hair evened out into a sharp shoulder-length bob, stood in a navy blazer that used to belong to her mother, and eyes that belonged to no one but herself. She was flanked by two people, her mother, Sarah Brooks, and a civil rights attorney named Janelle Quinton. A woman who had once taken on the NYPD and won. Janelle didn't smile. She carried a slim leather folder filled with documents and a quiet fury that didn't need to raise its voice to make itself known. Inside the boardroom, the temperature dropped the moment Alina walked in. 7 board members sat around a gleaming table. Among them, Richard Van Doren, father of Connor. Beside him, a woman who looked like a ghost version of Lila, pale, tight-jawed, and furious. The school's headmistress, Emmeline Radford, stood at the front, trying to hide the tremble in her hand as she tapped her planner against her thigh. "Miss Brooks," Radford began, "this meeting has been called to discuss the disruption you've caused." "Excuse me," Janelle said, setting down the folder. "This meeting has been called because my client was assaulted in class and the institution did nothing, then attempted to silence her, then threatened her. Let's keep the language precise." A low murmur passed around the table. Richard Van Doren leaned forward. "You've made quite a mess for yourself, young lady." Alina didn't blink. "No, sir. You made the mess. I just stopped pretending it wasn't there." What followed wasn't a meeting. It was a trial. Alina played audio clips, emails between teachers mocking financial aid kids, screenshots of the group chat where Connor and his friends debated how best to humiliate her, even footage of Mr. Garrett ignoring past bullying incidents. But it was the flash drive that broke everything. Janelle inserted it into the projector and began to speak. "This drive contains 15 years of records: embezzlement, grade tampering, retaliation against whistleblowers, and, most disturbingly, a pattern of documented abuse swept under the rug in exchange for donations." The room fell silent. The numbers were brutal. 42 harassment cases uninvestigated, 6 assault cases settled privately, $4.2 million in philanthropic write-offs tied to student discipline leniency. Then came the moment that tipped it all. A recording, not of Connor, not of Radford, but of Richard Van Doren himself. "We'll bury this girl just like we buried the Johnson family. Pull the mother's shifts, audit her taxes. By spring, they'll be begging for tuition forgiveness." The board sat frozen. Someone whispered, "We're done." The door opened. 3 federal agents entered, badges in hand. "We're placing Richard Van Doren and Emmeline Radford under arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit fraud." Richard stood but didn't protest. He didn't even look at Alina as the cuffs clicked. Headmistress Radford began to sob, not out of guilt, but out of the sudden realization that her power had expired. As they were led away, one board member leaned toward Janelle and asked, "How much of this will go public?" "All of it," she said. By sunset, Westbridge Academy was trending globally. 3 board members resigned that day. 2 teachers were suspended pending investigation. And the Department of Education announced a new federal oversight policy, nicknamed Alina's Law by the press, requiring elite institutions to publish transparent records of disciplinary action. But what happened next? That's where the real story begins. Because for all the headlines and applause, Alina went back to school the next Monday. She still rode the bus, still packed her lunch, still studied under the same cracked ceiling. But the air had changed. No one dared whisper as she passed. No one pulled out a phone to record her. Even Mr. Garrett left a note on her desk. It read, "I'm sorry." I see it now. She didn't respond. Because it wasn't about being seen. It was about making sure no one else had to be invisible again. Let me close this story with a final thought. Sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like a 17-year-old girl walking into class with a folder full of truth and a face that says, "Try me." She didn't want to be famous. She didn't want revenge. She wanted safety, fairness, dignity. And they tried to take even that. But here's the thing about trying to cut someone down. They might just grow back stronger, sharper, and more rooted than ever. Alina Brooks didn't just win, she rewrote the rules. And in classrooms across the country, other students took notice. You don't need a lawyer to start. You need the truth, the courage to speak, and a reason to never sit down again.